A warning, this podcast talks about child abuse.
A bubbly little boy brutally killed, and almost 3 weeks on, still no answers as to who's responsible.
This poor child suffered a violent death.
A man has been charged with murder after the death of a child in the Auckland suburb of Manukau yesterday.
At-risk children are no safer now than they were 3 years ago.
This is a national shame, how we are treating children in this country.
It's been called New Zealand's dirty little secret, the devastating amount of child abuse occurring in our homes. Too many babies killed and harmed, usually by their parent or caregiver. But in some cases, are authorities now being too quick to judge parents and accuse them of abuse, when there could be an innocent or medical reason for the injuries?
The rush not to miss child abuse is that it is being overdiagnosed, and primarily in this country at Starship Hospital.
Kia ora, I'm Amanda Gillies, and on The Detail today, the award-winning Kiwi journalists who believe some mums and dads in New Zealand are being put away for child abuse and murder when they say there could be an innocent or medical explanation.
Once this medical evidence was put on the table,
you are sentenced to 2 years and 7 months in prison.
Their fates have been sealed.
They destroyed my life.
A controversial medical diagnosis, a baby taken, a mother jailed. We will ask, did the doctors, the police, the courts and so many of New Zealand's state agencies get it wrong?
Melanie Reid and Bonnie Sumner are behind the Newsroom podcast Fractured, which looks into a complex case involving a medical diagnosis and its fallout on a young family, Mum Zita, Dad Ravi and baby Kay. Here's Melanie.
Fractured is about a Indian woman who came to New Zealand, took her lovely little 8-week-old baby to Starship because it wasn't well, and ended up getting charged with abusing her daughter. She went to jail, she went through the courts, she is now being deported, and we have spent a year, or over a year, proving that the medical evidence that her conviction was based on is flawed.
How is it flawed? How did they get this so wrong?
Well, that's a big question. It's a question that's being asked all over the world because it starts with the shaken baby syndrome diagnosis.
3 seconds is all it takes to change a life forever. Most of the time, shaken baby syndrome occurs when adults, frustrated and angry with children, shake them violently. Shaken baby syndrome is child abuse. 1 in 4 shaken babies die. Others are left permanently disabled, mentally and physically.
So the baby at the centre of the Fractured podcast was diagnosed with shaken baby syndrome after Mum Zita took her to Starship in 2018. Baby Kay had no external bruising or injuries, but was gasping for air. A scan revealed extensive fractures and injuries. Here's Bonnie.
So she had what they call the triad in shaken baby circles, which was a retinal hemorrhage, so bleeding behind the eye, a brain hemorrhage, which is bleeding between the skull and the top of the head, and then brain damage or brain injury. And since the advent of shaken baby syndrome as a hypothesis, when doctors see the triad, they've always said that is a definitive diagnosis of child abuse. And there are doctors overseas now who are saying that that's not true and that is just a hypothesis and it's actually an assumption and there isn't scientific validity to it. She did also have multiple fractures, so tiny fractures throughout her body. She had 38 rib fractures. And then, interestingly, she had 2 skeletal surveys, so those are x-rays of the full body. She had one when she was first admitted and then 12 days later before she was discharged. And the one 12 days later showed new fractures, so ones that The radiologist dated as being around 7 to 10 days old, so it's hard to know, but there are definitely questions around whether those could have been caused while she was under 24-hour watch at Starship.
Point being that here we had fractures potentially occurring while she was in hospital under 24-hour watch. So she did present with all of these injuries. And so nobody is disputing that, least of all the parents. What's under dispute is how she got them.
And that's what I want to know, because if it isn't shaken baby syndrome, if it's not child abuse, what can cause these injuries or these fractures?
Yeah, well, this is the point of the story, is that this issue over shaken baby syndrome has been bubbling away overseas for a long time. And there are a number of childhood illnesses that mimic what they're saying shaken baby syndrome is.
They say this includes birth trauma, bleeding disorders, vitamin deficiencies, brittle bones, collagen disorders, among others. We will talk more on this in a moment.
And so that's why this has sort of become a bit of a global fiasco, if you like, because if you look at the big picture here, if shaken baby syndrome is not legitimate, imagine what that means. You've got thousands of people in jail.
Just last week, a Texas death row inmate asked for a new trial after his execution was delayed. Robert Robertson was convicted of capital murder after his 2-year-old daughter was said to have died of shaken baby syndrome. His lawyers say the determination was based on junk science and that his daughter Nikki likely died of natural causes.
Prosecutors back in 2002 argued Nikki died from shaken baby syndrome. Robertson has long maintained his innocence.
I can't tell you what happened to her because I don't know.
His lawyers argue shaken baby syndrome has since been debunked by medical experts, and they claim Nikki actually died from pneumonia complications.
While he is still breathing, there's still time to bring the truth to light.
You've got an industrial complex that's, been fed into the medical schools, the universities, the hospitals worldwide. You have really got a global fiasco because it not just affects the medical system, it affects the justice system. So it all comes down to that diagnosis. And what we've done in this story is we worked globally. We've worked with a lot of doctors. We've worked with a lot of scientists. We've worked with the heads of universities. We've worked with investigative journalists. And that we have the big picture here of what's going on. So yes, it's about Zita and Ravi and the people in our case, and it's about the Starship Child Abuse Unit, but it's also about the big picture because it could quite easily completely implode. In fact, for years, even in this country, there have been cases that have been turned around. You don't really get to hear about them because when you're charged with child abuse and you spend 2 years trying to get your kids back and all your money and try and hold on to your relationship and all the rest of it, you tend to not advertise that. You tend to just kind of skulk away. You usually leave your community, maybe the country. But, definitely the legal fraternity knows that there's a really big issue here. And in fact, a decade ago, the judges fired a warning shot to Starship Hospital about their diagnosis or their overdiagnosis of child abuse.
That's right. In one case, it was in 2010, the Crown Solicitor, Auckland Crown Solicitor, met with Starship to consider engaging overseas experts to review their opinions after a case was thrown out, essentially, very similar to our case that we're looking at now.
We put this to Starship Hospital. In a statement, Te Whatu Order Group Director of Operations of Auckland City Hospital, Mike Shepherd, told the Detail, "We are confident of the expertise of our Starship Child Protection Team and the work they do in conjunction with New Zealand Police and other relevant agencies."
What Melanie always says that I love, which is, never underestimate the power of a pull together. And, in a case like this and similar to, covering uplift cases and things with Oranga Tamariki, you have one case pops up and another pops up, but there's no big picture. No one has pulled back and looked at what's actually going on systemically. And I think that that's what's happened here, is that you just have one that pop up, and as Melanie says, and they disappear again because they don't want to have the light shone on them again, as you wouldn't. But to actually pull back and say, actually, is this a systemic issue? It's not just individual cases. Is this something massive, that is actually going on here and overseas?
And, the judges have said in the UK, and it's been repeated here, the science has moved away, I'm quoting here, the science has moved away from certainty towards uncertainty. So this is a really big issue. And we are using one case to illustrate that. And we were quite, we were literally holding our breaths a bit, because we did go to a number of experts and we didn't know when we sent all the medical files to them what they were going to come back with.
And I know that's part of season 2, which is coming out. But is it things? What are similar to it? Is it rickets? Is it brittle bones? What sort of things mimic shaken baby syndrome, which these babies and your baby could possibly have?
Well, we have a list of 33 of them, but in the case of baby Kay, our experts that we've gone to have come back and said things like vitamin D deficiency. So we know she had extremely low levels of vitamin D. They were 11 nanomoles per litre, and the minimum is 50.
That's right.
She could have a genetic form of osteogenesis imperfecta, which is a brittle bone condition, which is genetic, but you can have transient forms of it. So she didn't have the classic signs of it, but you can have other forms, which our genetic expert that we spoke to, a professor overseas, he said that, there are many forms, and she could have had one of those, but she wasn't tested for them. Acquired vitamin D deficiency. And also one of the most interesting ones was that her skull fracture, according to one of our experts, he's actually said that it is an accessory suture, so it's not a skull fracture at all. It's a congenital condition, something that she was born with due to having some kind of condition such as brittle bones.
Here are some of the specialists who will feature in the next series of Fractured.
Well, the skull lesion is not a fracture, so that is not abuse. It's congenital.
It's congenital?
Yes. So it's present at birth.
I can only tell you that this baby was injured during the time of labor and delivery and was subjected to extraordinary forces during that delivery.
This is guaranteed vitamin D deficiency. It's severe.
So if you start from the start, if she's got extremely low levels of vitamin D, then all of these things could potentially have happened to her as a result of a really horrific birth. The obstetrician from the US, who has delivered, 6,000 babies or something along those lines, and he's saying this injury potentially occurred at birth because he's looked at all the fetal heart monitoring tracings. So you've got the experts that are saying, no. I mean, we haven't got one. I've learned a long time ago as a journalist, you don't get one opinion. We've actually got 4, we've actually got 5. And such worthy opinions from such esteemed professors that we have compiled these, and we've taken the case now to the Criminal Case Reviews Commission.
Mr. Foreman, how do you find the defendant Zita on the charge of injuring with intent to injure or with reckless disregard?
Guilty.
How do you find the defendant on the charge of wounding with intent to injure or with reckless disregard?
Guilty.
How do you find the defendant on the charge of ill treatment or neglect of a child?
Guilty.
3 years ago, Mum Zita was convicted of hurting her infant daughter. At her sentencing, the judge described the medical evidence as overwhelming. Zita didn't have any medical specialists on her side in court. She spent the next 2.5 years behind bars. Why didn't this get presented in court? Why didn't the mother have this on her side with her lawyer to present this to the jury to say?
Why don't any of them? I mean, this is another question about, access to justice that Bonnie and I talk about quite a lot, and it's a theme through a lot of our stories. I mean, she was an immigrant. She didn't have any money. She had a legal aid lawyer. They had no access. And in fact, even people that have got money are having trouble. Like, I cannot tell you how many lawyers, how many families are ringing us saying, God, please help us. Can you find us an expert in this, in this, in this? The lawyers, the KCs, people going into appeal courts are all ringing us, asking us for our experts.
How often is this happening in New Zealand?
Oh, well, that's a big... how often is it happening in New Zealand? We're looking at 5 to 10 cases at the moment, but we can't handle all the cases. Like, we basically run an agency. I always say we run an agency where we try and help people put them onto the right people, the right experts. Because if you don't have access to an alternative medical opinion, you're down the Googler. That's all there is to it. And I think that there is a wider legal question that's been proposed, which is, should the doctors who diagnose child abuse, as in this case with Zita and Ravi and baby K, should they also be the ones giving expert evidence in court? So it's like a bit of a David and Goliath situation.
And at the heart of all of this, of course, is baby K and is her parents. So, she hasn't seen her mum for over 3 years in person. She was denied any contact whatsoever, not a phone call, nothing, for 2 years. And now she's on the brink of being deported, the mother. And then because her father Ravi's visa depends on his wife's, he is on the brink of being deported also. And then baby K, Oranga Tamariki have an order to keep baby K in New Zealand, so she'll be here without her parents.
She's now 6.
6 years old.
In a remarkable last-minute twist, the Immigration Minister has just cancelled Zita's deportation order while her case is under review, allowing her to stay in the same country as her daughter.
People forget that baby K's, she's got a couple of issues, but she's pretty much fine. She didn't die, so we're not talking about someone's baby who died here.
How is baby K doing?
Baby K is still on anti-seizure medication, and I think that she has a few issues at school, but no one's quite sure whether they are as a result of her being in a whole bunch of different foster homes or if it's a result of her injuries. She definitely had injuries, and no one's denying that she had injuries.
Were they outward injuries or internal? Was there any sign of bruising or anything like that?
None whatsoever. And that's sort of at the heart of this, that a lot of the experts have come back and told us, is that without that, then it makes it unlikely.
6 years on, has she had a full body scan or anything? Have there been any other fractures or anything since then?
No. When she was given vitamin D at the hospital, she basically...
Well, she was treated for, they suspected initially that it was meningitis, and so she was treated for meningitis and given antibiotics. And then she was treated for her extremely low levels of vitamin D and low calcium. So at this stage, we've had one of our experts say that it looked like she could have had meningitis, and certainly had very low levels of vitamin D. So she was treated for both of those.
What has Starship had to say in response to your investigations, in response to this?
Sorry, I'm laughing, but I shouldn't be. It's just like, it just feels like now, I don't know if you find it, Amanda, but there is no accountability in the public sector, and they can basically put a woman in jail for years and just say, I'm sorry, but we can't talk about this because there was a court case, or don't actually start me on it, because, as far as I'm concerned, they need to front up and talk about this case and other cases, because the problem here is not just with this case. The problem is the rush not to miss child abuse is that it is being overdiagnosed, and primarily in this country at Starship Hospital.
Yeah, and the rush to not miss child abuse, they're in essence causing it, because the effects on these families and on these children in particular are devastating. Devastating, as we know, when children are removed from loving parents that haven't harmed them, that's devastating. If it was happening to you, it would be devastating.
In a statement, Starship told the Detail, "We are unable to comment on specifics of this individual case for a range of reasons. As always, we encourage patients and whānau to reach out to us directly if they have concerns about their or their loved one's care. Alternatively, people are welcome to contact the Health and Disability Commission for an independent review."
They were dealing with the Auckland Hospital, Starship, and the medical experts there. They were dealing with oranga tamariki, who uplifted the child. They were dealing with the police. They had dealt with the court. They had dealt with the appeal court. They had dealt with the parole board. They had dealt with Immigration New Zealand.
That is one hell of a lineup.
Yeah.
I feel exhausted just hearing about it.
I felt pretty exhausted as well, but not as exhausted as them.
That's former Race Relations and Human Rights Commissioner Joris de Brez, who is helping and supporting Melanie and Bonnie in features throughout the Fractured podcasts.
The family got in touch with him after he wrote about another similar case for another media organisation, and he then got in touch with us, and that's how it sort of got the ball rolling, because he'd had a similar experience as well, and he knew of other cases. So he's been just a tireless advocate for this family and has been a wealth of information and support.
What was his one? What was his personal situation that sort of led him to get involved?
So both of his daughters have osteogenesis imperfecta, and they were looked at when they first brought their children in. I think one of their children, this is his story to tell, but my understanding is that he brought one of his daughters in when she had a fall and onto a toy, and because of that condition of brittle bones, the effect on the child was much greater than it would be for a normal child, and
they were questioned.
What do you want authorities to do? What should be happening now?
We believe there needs to be a systemic review on all cases of shaken baby syndrome, and potentially wider than that, people who say that they have been accused of abusing their children when it is not clear that it is abuse. And what's happening with this case that we're doing with Fractured is that there are other people coming to us saying, look, I dropped my son in the shower, I grabbed him by the leg, and they've said that I've abused him. Like, there's case after case after case. So, it comes back to that, in the rush not to miss child abuse, it's being overdiagnosed. And we have one kind of group of people who are doing all the diagnoses. So that means that if Starship Hospital say you've abused your child, then it all everyone falls into lockstep, because what you end up with is Starship say it, so then the police come in, the judiciary listen to the police, so does oranga tamariki, so does corrections, and in our case, so does immigration. So, there is a wall of state agencies, and God help anyone trying to fight them. So what we want is a systemic review of a lot of these cases, particularly pertaining to shaken baby syndrome, because if the diagnosis is wrong, then that is one hell of a fiasco.
The first series of Fractured has already aired. The second series launches today. The name perhaps best sums up the state of the family.
They're broken in every way. They're heartbroken. They're financially broken. Their relationship's broken. Everything is broken. And they're hiding. They're hiding from the wider Indian community because they're Punjabi. So what that means is that if you are accused or convicted of child abuse, there is a stain on your family. So no one wants to be involved with your family. No one wants to be married into your family. So they're hiding as well. And plus, she is trying to have primarily an online relationship with her daughter, telling her that she's in India when she's actually down the road with an ankle bracelet on, unable to be in contact with any children, let alone her own. So there's, it's just endless, and they just look exhausted. And I think the sad thing is that they came to New Zealand for a better life, and it's broken them.
That's all for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Melanie Reid and Bonnie Sumner. This episode was produced by Alexia Russell and engineered by Phil Benj. I'm Amanda Gillies. Matua.